Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody else in between. I am Sam. This is gemini-tkd-sam channel, and this is your home for Taekwondo, martial arts, and everything else in between as well, related from politics, philosophy, psychology, to general chit-chat and shit. Not literally shit. We don't talk about shit on my channel. Well, we metaphorically talk about shit sometimes, but we don't talk about the literal shit. And now we're talking about shit. So yeah, I can add that to the list of what we talk about on this channel. Shit, lovely. I'll greet you all with a nice cup of Earl Grey. Okay, so today's live stream, it's been a while. It has been a while since we've done a live stream. So I just looked and thought, you know what, I've got some time to kill. So why not just do a live stream, impromptu, and open the floor. There is no agenda for today's live stream. It's just whatever comes, even though I did have a few like loose ideas running around in my mind as to things which could be explored or discussed. War continuing to go on in Iran, which is expanding out into the wider Middle East, which I feel everybody likes talking about politics. Everybody becomes an armchair general. So that is something which may very well actually take the focus of this live stream, you know, thinking about it. Other things could be speaking about as well is my upcoming Choi Kwang Do spar, or challenge spar number 4, which is against somebody that does Choi Kwang Do. It's been a long time coming. It really has. Challenge spars. I've been putting those out since like mid 2021. First one was in January 2022 against a guy who claimed to do Tai Chi but didn't use any Tai Chi at all, which was somewhat disappointing. Second one was against a boxer, a guy who did boxer and BJJ, but we kept it stand up. He became pretty much, I'd actually say, a friend after that. You know, we rolled together, we seemed to gel together personally as well. We kept in touch afterwards, and yeah, we met up a couple of times, and you know, we actually have each other's numbers as well. I don't want that to sound romantic, but we do, and we do talk, and quite often we do send like little silly, stupid little memes and jokes to each other. Same individual came back for challenge spar number 3, which this time, instead of him coming down to where I was, I went to where he's based and stationed. Just think it was fair for me to take the journey that time round. Rolled, had good fun again. Put out challenge spar number 4. It was meant to happen last year. That fell through. But then an individual contacted me from Choi Kwang Do. They saw one of the videos I put up about Choi Kwang Do. They didn't necessarily like what I was saying about Choi Kwang Do. Fair enough. Everybody's entitled to an opinion. And he contacted me and he was like, hey, you know, do you fancy having a spar? And I was like, yes. Yes, I do. I like sparring. I want to have a spar. And if it's against Choi Kwang Do, then yeah, that will be fun. I've done a lot of training for that, to be honest. The last I'd say like the last month and a half, I've been training. I've been focusing a lot on my personal fitness. The last, I'd say, 3 or 4 solid training sessions I've had have been more technical. So it's like, okay, fine. You've done all the physical conditioning. You've done all the physical fitness aspect. Now, what is it you want to do in this spar? Are you going to be taking TKD, or are you going to be taking Kyokushin like I did predominantly in challenge spar number 1? Are you going to be jazzing up? I've learned some Cornish wrestling since then. I've learned some Chen style Tai Chi since then. So I feel as though I've got a lot of stuff to draw upon from recent martial arts avenues, but also from my history as well. And I thought to myself, how about I just make a big mishmash? Why not use all of it? And I was thinking about some boxing as well, just thinking to myself, you know what, how about as an act of goodness and to show my good character, I will abstain from doing kicks, which for me is a very, very hard thing to do. And just keep it to the fists, just keep it to boxing, keep it to the jabs, to the crosses, uppercuts when they're getting close, this kind of stuff. So it has been fun. But the training in and of itself, a lot of people say don't necessarily enjoy the destination. It's the journey that you enjoy. And the journey is what the journey of the whole experience is what you learn from. You learn from going through that journey. And I've enjoyed looking back, I had my last training session today, and I enjoyed looking back from finishing my training today to when I started my training about a month and a half ago, and seeing the progress which had been made, and not just seeing the progress, but feeling the progress, feeling the difference in and of myself, mentally and physically. And I suppose longitudinally as well, I could say actually, compared to the first few challenge spars which I did, certainly the first one, I would say that I'm much more mature as a person, much more mature as a fighter. And it's not a case of gung-ho stuff. It's like, right, okay, I'm wanting to go in there with a game plan and to see what I can make of it. We shall see. We shall see. But yeah, plan to film that and have that published on my channel as Friendly Challenge Spar number 4, raw footage. So yeah, I'll upload basically whatever happens is going to get uploaded. Fall on the floor, get kicked onto the floor, punched in the head, kicked in the head. It's going on the video. It's not going to be tweaked or anything like that to make one person appear superior to the other person. And that's what I've done with the previous challenge spars. The only time where a break in the filming will come is if it's like an actual break in the spar. Be like, right, let's break for a bit to go get some fluids on board, or somebody needs a toilet or something like that. So yeah, I mean, that's up and coming. How am I finding life down in the West Country? I'll never consider it home. Let's just say that. Actually, to be honest, I don't necessarily want to talk about West Country. So yeah, with all due respect, I feel we'll probably just steer away from that, because that could be a very, very negative kind of discussion. There's enough negativity in the world as it is at the moment. Why do we need to add more negativity onto an already negative situation? I mean, for fuck's sake, Andy Burnham is Prime Minister. Getting rid of Keir Starmer. I mean, thank fucking God he's gone, because he was just a squashed pimple on an ass cheek, and he needed to go. Anybody who voted for Starmer, you deserve what you got. Seriously. But who's he been replaced with? Burnham. I've only heard, it's weird, he's only been in power for like, what, 3-4 weeks? But I've only ever heard one video or one recorded footage of Andy Burnham talking. And he sounds bored. He sounds laborious. There's nothing stand out about him. There's no charisma. He just looks like another Starmer. Or he looks like Starmer when Starmer was younger, just without grey hair. But otherwise, policy-wise, he appears to just be exactly the same. And he has tried to do a few U-turns on some Starmer policies. Yet that is suggestive of things, because that goes to show that actually Burnham and the greater Labour Party must have been aware, actually at the end, that Starmer's policies were so unpopular. And yet they let him keep doing them. They let Starmer just keep rolling out these weird and wacky policies and doing like Online Safety Act, and then which really wasn't about online safety. He claimed it was all for about keeping children safe, and yet there was evidence to suggest actually it wasn't about that at all. And then he tried covering up the grooming gang scandals, and then he tried putting the pensioner fuel tax or winter fuel tax, one of the very first ones he ever did, raising taxes and all this kind of nonsense. And yet he kept doing them pretty much towards the very, very end of his premiership. When he was axed, Burnham came in and started like reversing or U-turning some of these policies. The reason why, and his popularity kind of went slightly up in the polls, and they overtook Reform. And I kept hearing on the car radio going to and from work, they were bigging it up so much, like, yes, Labour are ahead of Reform. What does this mean? And I remember listening to this and thinking, how about when Reform went ahead of Labour, you never heard this kind of hype. Nobody was kind of saying like, oh yeah, what does this mean? It's the end of Labour. It's reflective of the mood of the country, that people generally are right-wing leaning when it comes to life in general. At the end of the day, you're not going to get many fully grown adults who are going to be left-wing leaning unless they have some sort of mental health condition. There's an old saying that if you're not a lefty when you're young, you don't have a heart. If you're not a conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. Now, I'm not advocating the Conservatives at all. I think the Conservatives are pretty much an extension of the Labour Party. The Tories, to all intents and purposes, pretty much are a uni party with the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, if you even remember who the hell they are. I really had to pinch myself, actually, when I heard Lib Dem the other day, and I was like, my God, are they still alive? But essentially, those three main parties are a uni party. And I'm not advocating for people to vote for Conservative Party, whatever, because I feel if you vote for a Conservative Party now, you're just going to get a Labour Party or a party which is claiming to be conservative but actually runs on Labour policies and ideologies, but just at a bit of a slower rate. Look at Boris Johnson. Conservative Party, was it conservative? No. State control over everything, which is left-wingism, that's socialism. And to the extreme, communism and Marxism. Forcing people to get COVID jabs, getting like vaccine passports. And again, when was the last time you ever heard somebody talk about a vaccine passport? Not for years, because they're just completely useless now. I got out my vaccine passport, which is still in my wallet. I got it out the other day and wanted to show it to somebody. I think it was like a joke. I don't even really remember why I even got it out. And they just looked at it and said, what the hell is that? Don't you remember 6 years ago? Everybody had to have one. But point being, that was an alleged Tory who was just espousing left-wing narratives and left-wing policies. So that was just a Tory party in name. In action, it was essentially a Labour Party. And I am glad we didn't go through those COVID years with somebody like Starmer or, God forbid, Corbyn in power, because it would have been worse. Whatever the Tories did then, which was bad enough, and admittedly, I voted for Tories in 2019, that I came to regret that decision, admittedly, hands on heart, come 2020, when the whole COVID narrative picked up. And I was like, my God, what have I voted for? But it would have been so much worse under an active left-wing government. The Labour Party under Starmer, the Labour Party under Corbyn. It would have been horrific. It really would have. Yet, that being said, what actually happened to the Tories when they lost 2024 was a result of largely the whole COVID episode. Because when people voted for the Tories in 2019, a lot of it was based on the whole doctrine and paradigm of get Brexit done. There was nothing in that manifesto that said, yes, COVID's going to come and this is what we're going to do. Now, of course, some people could say, well, COVID wasn't even a thing back in like 2019 when the Tories got in. It was only a thing which really picked up in like early 2020. So why have they been talking about something that wasn't even really around at that time? And that's fair enough. But one would have thought now all companies, all parties would say, if we were to have another global pandemic or health scare, this is what we will do. The Tories didn't. So yeah, people voted for them. Largely was Brexit. Came 2020 and COVID came around, and suddenly the whole Brexit thing just kind of collapsed. And the Tories on Brexit, they really did. They pretty much wanted to keep the UK tied to various different European institutions like the European Court of Human Rights, European Court of Justice, etc., etc. But the focus went on to COVID, and we got what we got. Having to wear face nappies, having to stand, what was it, like 2 meters apart from people. There was the rule of 6. If you have people around your house, you have to have 6 people. Then they have the tier system in the UK. It's like, if you're in this part of the UK, it's tier 1. If you're in that part, it's tier 2. And if you're in that part, it's tier 3. Really, how do you even come up with those? How can you define what is tier 1, 2, and 3? How do you know that it's the rule of 6? Why not the rule of 5? Why can't you have 5 people? Why not 7? Then you had to have like 2 jabs. Why 2? Oh, then you need a booster. Then you need a booster on top of a booster, and then you need a booster to boost up that booster, which didn't boost up that booster, which didn't boost the normal ones. And I met somebody once in 2022. I was doing an interview with somebody, and she told me that she'd had like 6 COVID jabs. And I almost just laughed at this person. It's like, what? So the first 5 weren't effective, yet you think the 6th one is going to be effective? Come on, just use a bit of fucking common sense. But anybody who dared challenge that narrative was called a conspiracy theorist. And that seems to be the thing. Since 2020, anybody who voices opposing views or sides with the dissenters, people who don't comply, they are very, very quick to be labelled. And as we saw in 2020, the worst labels you could put on somebody were anti-vaxxers. You're an anti-vaxxer. Well, actually, no, I'm not. Fucking hell. I mean, when I went to Malaysia, I've lived in many countries in the world. When I lived in Malaysia, I went out as a 3-year-old kid. I still remember it. I had an injection at my bum. For God's sake, it was painful. I remember it. When we left Malaysia, we went to go and live in Dubai. I remember getting an injection for Dubai. I went and did charity work in Sri Lanka. I needed loads of injections for Sri Lanka. I went to India. I got typhoid in India. I needed an injection in India. And then I've had all these other injections, few and far between. BCG injection, meningitis injection, cholera, diphtheria, Hep A, Hep B. I've had loads of injections. I'm not anti-vax. I'm quite happy, because if I didn't have any of these injections, I would have died a long time ago, I'm sure. But it was just this specific injection, which when it was rolled out, I remember it was Johnson & Johnson, which that company kind of disappeared very quickly and was never really talked about again. They had AstraZeneca and they had Moderna and Pfizer, of course. My first jab was Moderna, and I had my Moderna one because a job I'd applied for at the time said, if you don't have your COVID vaccine, you're not going to get the job. So I only had the jab. And I'm not calling that one a vaccine. I'm calling that one just a jab. I had that jab because I needed a job. I needed to pay bills. I needed to feed the family I had at the time. Now, that traumatized me so much, this whole wacky period that we lived in, that I almost did my thesis on it. Indeed, I did do my thesis on the actual COVID vaccinations, but it was a slightly different one. The original one I wanted to do was actually the same situation which I found myself in, which was the research question would have been, are people having COVID jabs because they genuinely believe they're contributing to public health, or are they being coerced via systemic influences? That's quite a big research question, but you can delve so much into that. Social psychology, discursive psychology, which is all about the use of language, how language is used and how words and phrases are used and manipulated can influence if people want to get the jab. You get something in psychology called normative influence. Normative influence is basically, if everybody around you is doing something, you feel influenced to do it as well, because you want to go with the crowd. You want to be part of that group, the in-group. And you feel that if everybody else is doing it, you have an obligation to be doing it as well, to fit in. Why do you want to fit in? Because it helps with social cohesion. And if you don't do something that everybody else is doing, it breaks down social cohesion. And you find yourself becoming a pariah. You find yourself becoming socially ostracized. And you find yourself becoming persona non grata. So I felt I could really have used normative influence in that. Another type of influence you get is informational influence. Now that is basically where you do something because somebody in a position of power has told you to do it. And you assume that person in a position of power knows more about it than you do. So, for instance, prime example, you could go to the doctor and the doctor says, yep, you're very, very sick. I suggest you take these tablets. Chances are you probably will take those tablets. Why? Because the doctor has told you. and a doctor is in a position of authority. And you believe when it comes to health that you're not qualified, you don't have the experiences in the health system to know what is going on, whereas the doctor, in theory, should. A schema of the doctor should know what he's doing. So you will follow his influence. You'll be influenced by his suggestion because he is in a position of authority. And of course, if you're going to get, going back to COVID, if you're getting people like Boris Johnson and all the other people who are around at the time, who we'll come on to in a minute, actually, if they tell you to take your jabs because it will flatten the curve, if you remember that stupid quote, and it'll bring everything back to normal, you're going to do it. Chances are. At the end of the day, he's the prime minister. He's the leader of the country. He knows what he's talking about. He knows more about it than you do, which is probably actually true. He did know more about it than you and me, but probably knew a lot more than what he would like us to have known. But being said, yeah, I almost did my thesis on that. I ended up doing a thesis which was slightly different. It was just explaining or exploring the reasons why people got the jabs. It didn't go in as much in depth. But I remember the pressure from university I had to not do that thesis. They wanted me to do something else. And when I submitted my trial for ethics approval, it got declined. The university I was at was typical left-wing university. They don't like people who step outside to question things, even though the whole purpose of psychology as a social science is to question the science. One thing with COVID, a lot of the scientists at the time were saying, follow the science. I was okay, I'm going to follow the science and I'm going to question what you're saying, because questioning is part of science. It's part of scientific process to question, to ask people to prove things. You have a hypothesis, prove it. You have a theory. Okay, let's test it. Let's prove it. How can you learn anything if it's not tested? How can you improve anything if it's not scrutinized? Things need to stand up to scrutiny. Say, okay, yes, we did a test and the results, I don't know, we did a meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is basically like a whole load of different analysis or studies put into one over a set period of time. So you could have like a 10-year period and you could do 200 studies and all the results you combine into one. And that's a meta-analysis. So it's not just like a one-off chance of something happening. It's prolonged. And if things are prolonged, more evidence, the more accurate it's going to be. I've forgotten where I was going with that. Anyway. But I questioned it. I questioned the whole COVID narrative. To me, at the risk of sounding like a tinfoil hat man, it just seemed a bit weird. This what we were told was this virus came out of this bat market in China, in Wuhan. And this bat market, or wet market as they call it, just so happened to be across the road from a laboratory that studied viruses, virology. It's like finding an ice cream on the pavement melting, and across from the pavement you get like a Mr. Whippy factory. And you think, oh, I reckon this cream came from Mr. Whippy factory. But then the government's like, no. That ice cream, that specific ice cream came from the zoo. Yeah. Again, questioning everything. And do I believe COVID existed? Of course it did. Yeah. COVID existed. It was a real thing. It is a real thing. You know, it's still around. I was never diagnosed as actually having COVID myself, but I'm sure I got COVID quite a few times. And I was able to actually differentiate between a suspected COVID and a normal cold. I did feel generally physically weaker. I had more flu-like symptoms, quite severe flu-like symptoms in a short period of time. After about 3 days, I was fine. Was it unpleasant? Yeah, it wasn't the best experience of my life, I'm going to say. But did it warrant shutting down businesses? Did it warrant staying 2 meters away from people? Did it warrant touching people's elbows? What the fuck was all that about? Did it warrant clapping for carers every Thursday? You know, did it warrant creating this atmosphere of intense fear of the person standing next to you? You could have just been in the street and somebody goes, and suddenly they're like the Antichrist who's popped around for a cup of tea. That is what people felt on street level. It wasn't the UK anyway, because the government we had really, really hyped it up. It was what's called in psychology a deviancy amplification spiral. You take something which is minorly dangerous and you just amplify it to the point of absolute ridicule. But again, with those influences we mentioned earlier, normative influence and information influence, if people are saying, oh, it's happening, this is true, this should be taken seriously, you're going to take it seriously. The emperor has new clothes. The emperor was naked. But somebody said, oh, only a fool will not see what the emperor is wearing. He's wearing these lavish, amazing clothes. But only wise people can see him wearing them. If you can't see the emperor wearing his clothes, you're an idiot. That was essentially the whole COVID thing. Pardon me. We found something to talk about in the live stream. It's COVID. So where did this all stop? Well, actually, no, let's go back a little bit, because I remember seeing this on the TV, and I had to turn off TV for a while because this made me depressed. And it was all just about COVID. It was just like, here are the streets of China, and you saw people like lying down, dying from COVID, you know, and film crews just happened to be there filming these people dying in random streets. And you got people in hazmat suits going around, like putting them into incubators or putting them into trucks and stuff to take them off to hospitals. And then you had these checkpoints of where people had to walk up in the checkpoints, much like, you know, during the Cold War in the Soviet Union, where people had to queue up and get their bread and their rations. And at these checkpoints, you saw doctors in hazmat suits giving people the COVID tests, which we'll come on to. But I remember in the UK TVs, you got people like medical advisors, they were called, Patrick Vallance and Chris Whitty. Now, I'm going to tell you now, they are nowhere to be found in the UK. They've just disappeared. But during the whole COVID pandemic, one of them, Patrick Vallance, I think, was knighted. No, it was Chris Whitty. It doesn't matter. He didn't deserve it. But he looked evil. If you see, just go onto Google, type in Chris Whitty, and he looks evil. He was the UK equivalent of Dr. Fauci, Anthony Fauci. And Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance were pushing this whole rule of 6, wear your face nappies, all this kind of mantra. It was always 3 words they came out with, which is, again, a psychological tool. Use 3 words and people will generally remember it. Wash your hands, protect the NHS, keep your space, track and trace. Yeah, track and trace, that was another stupid thing. They complete fucking waste of money. But they kept coming out on the TV saying all this kind of stuff. Protect the NHS, wash your hands, and all this kind of malarkey. And they would appear on the TV every single night, and they would have these charts and boards of infection rates. Now, the COVID infection rate was very, very high, extremely high. And that's what they showed, just the infection rate. What they didn't compare it to on the graph was recovery rate and death rate. Why? Well, as we just said, the infection rate was very high. So when you show that on a graph, so here we are from January, there's no infection rate, and now we're here into April, and we're way up here. It looks really, really high. Psychologically, people are going to look at that and go, wow, go from nothing to there in 4 months. Gosh, you know, that's intense. That's a huge increase. And yes, it is. But they didn't show the recovery rate because the recovery rate was actually just as high. So that went to show that actually the death rate was extremely low. There were hardly any deaths. Per capita, there were hardly any deaths from COVID in comparison to how many people got infected. Loads of people, hundreds upon thousands of whatever the exact figure is, but lots of people got infected with COVID. Hardly anybody died from it. Now, that's not to dismiss every single death, because when people die, that is a tragedy. It's not nice when people die, whether from a disease or war, whatever, it's just not nice. So I'm not gloating on the people who did die from it. But most of the people who did die from COVID, studies have shown, were elderly, who had a very lower immune system anyway. They did have already existing health complications, or it was the death was misdiagnosed. I knew somebody back in Sussex who died by suicide during the whole COVID pandemic. And it was like a friend of a friend who died. But the mutual friend we had was actually quite upset, because she said on the coroner's report, it said this friend of hers died from COVID. And actually that was inaccurate, because they didn't die from that. They died because they hung themselves with a mattress from a bed around their neck. They tied it to a banister and they jumped over the banister. And the friend happened to walk in after 2 days of not hearing from them and saw them swinging still and rotting to fucking high heaven. And she got really upset. She was like, how dare they say this person died from COVID when they didn't? They died from asphyxiation from mattress being around their neck. Sweden, the country that actually reported deaths most accurately. And Sweden, throughout the whole pandemic, was actually very much used as the control condition, whereas all the other countries are used as experimental conditions. And Sweden, their approach was very much, okay, there is an illness going around, there is a virus going around. We will just continue leading normal lives. We're going to not let this affect us. There's a virus going around, exercise common sense, just wash your hands, get on with your life. And the death rate in Sweden was even less. And actually, the infection rate in Sweden was significantly less as well. So that then leads on to how statistics are reported, which we get into statistical psychology and we get into sociology. And a lot of sociology is all about how you analyze statistics. And what kind of phrasing are you using statistics? Are you using quantitative statistics or are you using qualitative statistics? That's quite a lot of statistics, I appreciate. But also going back to those graphs, again, how things are reported. The media, or essentially BBC, and I found myself, I never had that much time for BBC anyway. But during the pandemic, my faith in BBC just became non-existent. I haven't watched BBC since, and I never will. But I remember they, on the BBC programs with Dr. Chris Whitty, he used to stand there. Oh my God, seriously, check him out. He looks disgusting. He stood there with his like little clipboard, and he had this big screen next to him, and he used to stand there and read out infection rates going up and stuff. And he used to be like, today we have infection going. Next slide, please. And suddenly the next slide would come up, and the media tried to hype this up. On a side note, they were like, "Oh, isn't this funny? Let's have next slide, please," which is what Chris Whitty used to say as a jokey slogan. Let's get T-shirts with "next slide, please," and we'll think it's funny. Aha, of course. Trying to cutify, and that was a word I came up with at the time, which I wanted to use in my psychological studies, was cutify. Hold that cutify thought, because we're going to come back onto that. Going back to these statistics and the graph. So when Chris Whitty said, "next slide, please," and some Burke behind the screen would press a button and the next slide would come up, they would show anything and everything to show how bad COVID was. They'll show the infection rates, and again, infection rates, not recovery rates or death rates, infection rates for the rest of the European Union, or Europe at large. It wasn't just the EU. And then across the world. And it would always be places like, oh, the United States, they've got infection rates beyond anything else. My God, they're so bad out there in the States. They shut the fuck up. One, they've got a higher infection rate because the United States has a higher population. So that the proportion of people actually getting COVID in the States is going to naturally be higher than, say, people in fucking Monaco, which has a population of like, what, a couple of thousand, if that. Also, they were using it as propaganda. They were trying to make out as though like the American system was just rubbish. It may not be perfect, but it's certainly better than the fucking NHS. And I'll go to the grave saying that. But if you then saw comparisons, if they showed infection rate, recovery rate, and death rate all on the same slide, you could make comparisons. Okay, infection rate is up here. Like, let's say, I don't know, this week alone, 1,000 people have been infected. But the recovery rate is 995 people. So out of 1,000 people who've got it, 995 have recovered. Let's check that death rate. Like 5 people. Who are these 5 people? Oh, well, you know, one of them was like incredibly old anyway. He was on death's door. Another one was an infant, 6-month-old infant. Hadn't had a chance for the immunity system to develop. Another one died by being hit by a bus, carelessly crossing the road, but they happened to be infected with COVID, but they didn't die from COVID. They died with COVID. There's a difference from with. They may have also had a toothache. They didn't die from toothache. They may have had a headache at the time they got hit by. As a matter of fact, they probably did have a headache when they got hit by the bus, but the headache didn't kill them. The bus did. But no, they put that down to the COVID. So then you can start really kind of like scrutinizing the statistics. And when you, or if you looked at it like that, if they'd have shown that, those type of open, honest, as comprehensive statistics as possible, people would have been able to draw their own conclusions. People would have looked at that and gone, you know what, actually, so it's really only people who are infirm, elderly, very, very young, or have other health complications, or may have just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're the ones who happen to have the most chance of dying. And then people will be like, you know what, it's probably not actually that dangerous. Which we then found out with Borisgate scandal. But before that, let's talk about the just the phrase I mentioned earlier, cutify, and what I meant by cutify. It came to me. I need to put this into Urban Dictionary. I really do. I actually even write to the dictionary people, and I'm going to trademark this on this live stream. Gemini-tkd-sam live stream has trademarked cutify. Cutify was when you, my definition of it is when you try to make fun of a situation for something which is otherwise quite serious. But not just make fun, you attempt to make it funny. You attempt to make it joyous. You attempt to make it quite adorable. And this was seen, or I came around seeing this during the whole pandemic, when, again, media narrative, government narrative kept coming around saying stuff like, you have to understand we're in the new normal. Wearing masks, we may wear them for the rest of our lives. It's going to be the new normal. Doing things on fucking Teams, new normal. And I saw these adverts of people then walking around, normal adverts for just normal everyday products. I don't know, let's say teacups. There was an advert for cat type teacups. And you'd see people in the shops and they'd all be wearing masks and stuff. And one of them would go up to a counter and be like, and the person behind the till was like, and you can't hear each other. And then they start like laughing. And that's trying to cutify the fucking face masks, because I remember wearing those things and they were disgusting. They were horrible. They were hard to breathe. My glasses kept steaming up, so I constantly had to take my glasses off and refidget the face mask, which I was told I wasn't allowed to do because I could kill somebody. And just showing that stupid advert of people having fun with face masks. It's trying to cutify it. It's trying to make it cute. It's trying to make it quite, it's quite laughable. And another phrase, which was used a lot during the whole pandemic, because I saw another advert where people were trying to have a meeting on Teams. And there's like 5 people in this Teams meeting. They're all saying hi to each other. And one person in the meeting went, and everybody else was like, "You're on mute." And they all started laughing. "Oh, I'm so sorry." And you just think, why is this funny? This is horrible. What happened to engaging and interacting with people on a face-to-face basis? Maybe I was born like way before or after my time, but I hate people. But when I have to engage them, I prefer engaging face-to-face. I like talking to people face-to-face because I was raised to talk to people face-to-face. Going on Teams, and I appreciate the irony because this is like online as well, but it takes away the humanity of it. In my mind, it takes away those human skills. It takes away those intersocial skills that we should have learned at school and followed through into adult life. And to do it on Teams now, even when I get people saying, "Oh, let's have a Teams meeting," no, fuck that. We're going to meet face-to-face in person. Yeah, but I have to drive. Get in your car, stop being lazy, and move. Seriously. And then, yeah, just that's what I mean by cutify. And I saw it all on different adverts. It was similar kind of things. Another advert I heard on the car radio coming back from work during the pandemic. You heard these like kids talking on the radio. They're like, "Oh, Daz, you want to go to the club tonight?" "Yeah, Gaz, I'll be there. You come in, Shaz." And Shaz goes like, "No, mate, I ain't had my vaccine. Can't go anywhere." And then the other 2 people are like, "Oh, Shaz, you need to get your jabs, mate." And then the whole advert was like, "Don't miss out. Go get your jabs." And then you hear his mates like laughing as they're running off. And you think, again, why is it funny? Why is that cute? It's not. It's sick. It's coercive. It's bullying. It's playing around with somebody's moral compass. If people wanted to get their jabs or not, surely that should have been up to them. Now, this is almost like the crux of the debate, because the whole debate around during the whole COVID days was, are you a vacker or are you an anti-vacker? I used to call people who got their jabs jabberwockies. I thought, no, if you can call people anti-vaxxers, which we've really clarified earlier in the video is not entirely accurate, and it's labeling, and any type of label is generally going to be negative. Labeling theory is generally negative. When you put a label onto somebody, you're no longer looking at the person, you're judging a behavior. And it's just one behavior that somebody may have out of thousands of different behaviors. Somebody who cuts themselves, calling them a self-harmer or a cutter, that's a label. What that person is somebody in crisis. That is somebody that needs help. But going back to the jabs, I was thinking, fine, if you can label people anti-vaxxers, and the government seemed to not just not stop that, they seemed to almost be encouraging it, because they wanted people to be labeled anti-vaxxer, because nobody at that time wanted to be an anti-vaxxer, because if you were an anti-vaxxer, you're a bit of a tinfoil hat person, which again is a bit of a label, but you are seen as a conspiracy theorist, or a bit weird, a creep, like fucking Titch Wales. So I thought, fine, it's only fair if you can label people who don't get their jabs. How about you get a label, Jabberwocky? How would you like the sound of that? Yeah? How's it going, Jabber? Had your wocky today? How many have you had? Yeah, I'm not having mine. You can have my ones if you want. Yeah, it's not very nice, is it? But the whole crux of those years was divided between if you've had your jabs or not. Now, I as I said earlier, I reluctantly had my jabs. I held out because I didn't want them. I've always been healthy. From martial arts, I eat balanced diet. And sure, I mean, I'm no spring chicken anymore. I'm a late 30s. I'm not as fit as what I used to be. But when I see myself compared to other 38-year-old men, I consider myself very lucky and fortunate, because some other 38-year-old men I've met are not in good shape. So I've always looked after my health. And then suddenly this whole pandemic coming around and people telling me, oh, suddenly need not just one injection, but I need 2. So, okay, no, I don't. I'll just be careful. I'll develop my natural immune system to it, which is something that even I remember at school. In biology, in science, I was taught about natural immunity. Suddenly, during the COVID years, that just went out the window. Nobody ever spoke about natural immunity. And when people tried to voice it, they were suddenly called conspiracy theorists or anti-vaxxers. Anything to shut them down, anything to shut down a reasoned debate. There's always 2 sides, or sometimes more, to a debate. And you'll always know when somebody's scared of what you have to say, because they'll not address your argument, they'll address you personally. And especially if they start to actually call you names, you know you've won the argument, because they have nothing to fight you with. They've lost the fight, they've lost the argument. What do they have left? Personal insults. They just want to attack you now. They're not even listening to the argument you're saying, which could be very well structured and well reasoned and well thought out. No, they're just going to attack you because they know that they cannot face up against your argument and scrutiny. But yeah, I had eventually, like I said, I went to apply for a job and they said, if you haven't had your COVID jabs, you can not have the job. So I needed money. I needed to put food on the table. So I reluctantly said, fine, I'm going to, I suppose, deal with the devil and have these jabs who even at this early stage, I'd heard people had jabs and they developed weird symptoms and stuff afterwards. And again, that was very much brushed off in the media. People were pretending that wasn't happening. And when it actually became proven that it was, the narrative then changed to, it doesn't happen to, oh, it's only a very, very small number of cases. As it's been proven now, studies have shown. I saw a study that said like 72% of all the COVID deaths were related in some way, shape, or form to the jabs. I'll bring that up, actually. I can't do it now, because each time I try to do something outside of the live stream screen, the whole live stream crashes. So I'm not going to waste time doing that now, but I can find that study again. If anybody questions me about it later on, I can easily find it and post it as a reference. Pardon me. Oh gosh, sorry, bugging me. So yeah, I heard some horrible things about these jabs at that time, various health complications, and then I even heard that some people had even died from them. And again, the narrative at the time, when people put that forward, saying like, well, why should we get jabs which are probably going to kill us, or there is a chance of them killing us? Then the narrative changed again. It's like, oh, don't be silly. You know, if you look at per capita, blah, 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 you know, there's more chance of being struck by lightning or being eaten by a seahorse or something like that. They try to bombard you with scientific gumph as opposed to just address what you had to say. And then, strangely enough, when I remember I was about to have my jab, and they actually came up with an announcement saying that the companies are protected, that they're like politically immune and legally immune to any sort of like suing or court cases. And you think, why the hell would a company do that? Why would Pfizer have this new diktat that says that they're going to be free from being sued or legally pursued in the event of adverse side effects or death? We know why. They just want to protect themselves. But point being, if they were so convinced that what they're doing was right, they wouldn't feel the need to do that. Anyway, eventually sucked it up, and I went to go get my first jab in Brighton, in England, and it was this big superstore, Churchill Square. Churchill Square is this huge superstore in Brighton, and they gutted the whole of this shopping centre, where it was just basic on the inside. There was nothing there. There was no clothes or anything. It was literally just like a giant empty warehouse, is the most accurate way to describe it. And they have these two gorillas standing outside. And when I say gorillas, I do mean gorillas. They were literally these giant bouncers from Detroit. You know, they were battle-hardened bouncers, not just your local fucking outside of a shitty, pissy Bognor Regis kind of prostitute whorehouses. But anyway, went up to these security guards, and you know, they were like looking at me. I was like, oh, I've got a card that says I have to be here at this time, and they're like, and just waved me in. I went in, went up to the reception desk. She looked at me and was like, yeah, expecting, here you are, you're having Moderna. And I was like, well, who decided that? You didn't even talk to me. You didn't ask me which one I wanted. That's not informed consent. That's coercion. And she was just like, go down that way. And what happened next? I literally followed this queue of people, and it reminded me of like a conveyor belt. We went round this like fenced off area like you get at the airports when you're queuing up to check in. And then we went up the escalator and then through another hallway with this fenced off area until it came to the actual jab area. And as I was standing in this queue, there were like big pillars next to me, just pillars keeping up the roof of Churchill Square. And the pillars had these like stupid pictures on them, and it said stuff like, don't take photos. Don't get your phones out. You're not allowed to film stuff. And it's just like, why not? If I'm about to have a jab and somebody in front of me has a jab and they like fall on the floor and have a seizure, which I'd heard some cases have people actually did do that. So if that happens in front of me, I am going to get my phone out. Sorry, I am going to film it and I'm going to upload it onto my YouTube channel. And I'm guaranteed it's going to get like 1,000 hits within an hour of that's what happens to you if you have a jab. And of course, they didn't want people seeing that. They're like, no, if you get your phones out, you'll be like prosecuted. So again, it's like, oh, okay, so you don't want people to challenge you again. And I hate those kind of people. You're scum. You need to be challenged to grow. Otherwise, you'll stagnate and die like Rahel Eimer. Anyway, I sat down, had the jab. The jab itself was actually fine. It was really, really quick. And they said to me afterwards, oh, look, you know, go over to that little rest area over there and just sit down for 20 minutes. And I was feeling like really anxious at the time anyway. And I was really, really hot. It was stuffy. It was a hot day. And I was like, yeah, I need to sit down. I need to have some water. But yeah, go over to that seating area over there. So I did. I went over, sat on this seating area, and there were all these chairs, like 50-odd chairs, with all these other people who've been jabbed just sitting on them. All 2 meters apart, of course, because even though we've had our jabs, we're still dangerous, of course. You know, there's still a chance that we could spread this illness. And I remember sitting on this chair, and suddenly my head was like started swimming, and my vision was going black, and I saw these stars. Sorry, a thought just came into my mind there. And they had these goons who were like employed by whoever it was, volunteers, to watch over the people. And they're all standing in the front row, watching everybody. Anyway, I put up my hand, and one of them came over to me and was like, yeah, quite brusque. I was like, I feel like I'm going to faint. And I genuinely did. I felt lightheaded. I could feel myself going. And it's like, I need to lie down. Otherwise, I'm going to faint and I'm going to fall forwards out of the chair. Now, a person didn't believe me, I don't think, at first. And they were just like, what do you mean you're going to faint? I was like, do I need to fucking demonstrate to you? I'm going to faint. And anyway, these people came out of nowhere, bundled me into the corner of this giant hallway, put out this yoga mat, lay me on it, and they had a big screen which they pulled across so nobody else could see me. Now, they said that was for my own dignity. I don't have fucking dignity. I looked for dignity on the bottom of my foot. I can't find it there. I'm not going to find it anywhere else. And it's, I actually don't mind those people watching me. If they want to be voyeurs and see what I'm doing and rolling around having a seizure, they're more than fucking welcome to do so. In fact, they could get out their cameras and film me. Will I press charges? No. I'd encourage them to put it on YouTube. But that's what these guerrillas did. They like fenced all this off, and they had me there. One went off to get some water. Another one gave me like a biscuit. And he stayed with me for like, I don't know how long it was. It was ages. And gradually it all came back, and I was like, yeah, I'm fine, just a bit sweaty. They're asking me 110 questions. Do you feel okay? Where are you going now? What are you going to do? All this kind of stuff. And they said, as soon as you leave this place, I said, I'm going to go get some food. I'm going to get some Chinese. And then I'm going to go down to Brighton Beach and get some fresh air. Then I'm going to go home and watch Jurassic Park. I did all of those. And they said to me, oh, well, when you leave this place, don't stop and talk to anybody. Just go get your food, do what you need to do, and leave. Don't stop and talk. So that's a bit of a weird thing to say. But anyway, I staggered up, went to the door. They followed me to the doorway to make sure I didn't talk to anybody. And I wasn't even allowed to make eye contact with the people sitting in the area where I was originally. And anyway, I went out. Guerrillas guided me off site, and then I went and got some Chinese, and the rest is, you know, non-related, I suppose. But the whole experience was traumatic. And that trauma, not so much the trauma of having the injection, that was included in it, but I mean, the whole trauma of everything else, the constant media propaganda, the constant bombardment of negativity, the constant me trying to question, which was then shot down by people saying, no, you're just a conspiracy theorist. It's like, no, how about you actually just listen to what I have to say? No, you're a conspiracy theorist. Okay, well, do you trust government? Yeah. Okay, did you trust government before the whole COVID thing? No. So what makes you trust them now? Shut up, you're a conspiracy theorist. This, you know, you could argue with somebody ad nauseum, and it won't change their opinion. Something, sadly, I've come to realize in like recent days is actually that people generally don't change, which is a horrible, horrible thing to say, because we all like to know, or we like to think and envision that people do change. People go through life-changing experiences, and we see it in the movies. It's all nice and fabricated. Something happens, and they're like, oh, I'm going to be a better man now. For reality, people rarely change. And when I came to that realization, part of me was so sad, but then part of me was like, you know what, I shouldn't be sad, because in your heart of hearts, you kind of knew that. Of course, I've changed. I'm completely different. You know, to say like 10 years ago, I'm not hanging around with. Well, I'm not even going to talk about that. But nowadays, if you try talking to people about COVID, if they were very much pro government narrative, they'll tend, from my experience, they tend to now say, oh, well, it was so long ago, it's no point even talking about it. You do realize actually those government narratives and mandates that they had in the UK alone ruined businesses. They made people kill themselves. They broke up families. There was kids with autism found it very, very hard to adapt to changes in their routines. People developed mental health. I developed severe depression, anxiety, and PTSD from the mandates, not the COVID itself. COVID can go fuck itself. I can get COVID again, and I know I'm going to beat it. But it was the mandates that were brought out, induced my PTSD. I already had abuse from when I was younger, which had always been there. Depressive symptoms as well. But it was just these stupid COVID mandates which made it even worse, which really brought it forward. So when people say to you, no, so long ago, shouldn't talk about it anymore. Yes, talk about it. If we can still talk about shit from like thousands of years ago, if we can still talk about shit like Norman conquest of England, if we can still talk about Bannockburn, still talk about American War of Independence, still talk about apartheid in South Africa, if we can still talk about the British Empire colonizing the world, we can still talk about COVID days. As a matter of fact, I invite you, next time you have a family gathering or have a friend over, invite them to talk about COVID. See what they've got to say about the whole thing now, in comparison to 6 years ago, and compare where they are in their whole thought processes now. I do warn you though, you probably lose quite a few friends, and you probably have like some very heated family debates. I mean, I wanted to punch my brother in the face so many times. True story. Anyway, losers, thanks for tuning in. Ugh. I'll let you get on with the rest of your days. Stay safe, train hard, and don't listen to Rahel Eimer because she is a pro-Hamas sympathizer. Peace out.